There we are. Here we are.
Here we are. Welcome to the Business Velocity Podcast, where your journey to accelerated success begins. We're your hosts, Dave Newell and Hannah Panuski of Evolve Leadership Consulting, where in each episode, we dive deep into the 5 facets of business through conversations with business leaders. Whether you're a startup or a seasoned business leader, understanding how to harness these facets can transform your operations and propel your growth. Hannah, why don't you tell us a little bit about our guest?
Yeah, absolutely. So today we have someone on who I'm so excited to talk to. Always look forward to talking to this individual. Robert Powell, who is someone, I'm going to bring him in now. Hello, Robert.
Hi. Hey.
So we have worked with Robert for a long time, Dave longer than I, but I got to meet Robert at a very critical time, I'll say, in my career, and what a godsend. Robert loves questions and puzzles and challenges. He is inspired by innovation and kindness. I'll let him talk about his exit from corporate America. I'd love to hear your story there. He is a big family guy, loves his personal passions and to combine being outside with his family whenever he can. He runs Human Operations Solutions. They celebrate the different dynamics and diversity of employees. They simplify things when clear processes and position themselves as the friendly go-to for teams. They're not just curious about your industry. They're here to boost your organization's culture and bottom line. Robert, welcome to Business Velocity.
Thanks so much, guys. Super excited.
Yeah. Robert is our go-to HR guy. Often, we get brought in to work with organizations, let's say 5 to 15 employees, and they're kind of teetering on that growth stage. And as we help them scale up, often they need to bring in an HR, and Robert has been our go-to guy. We actually met on a mutual client in 2017, 2018, something like that.
Right.
And as Robert and I connected, it was like, oh, we were just like kindred spirits, kind of like that. So has been a longtime collaborator and friend. Excited to have you on board. Thanks for joining us. Where do you want to begin? I know you threw out some fun topics, but we were talking a little bit before the show about your transition out of corporate America and how that led you to buying a restaurant. So that's an interesting place. Maybe we just jump in there.
It is. Yeah, no, it's funny. When I was listening to Hannah's intro, I noticed there was human resources was not mentioned anywhere in that, which is probably a brand failure on my part, or maybe it's a good thing. Who knows? But yes, the way that I brand myself is kind of an accidental HR tourist, simply because I grew up in operations and wasn't able to do that out of college. So fell into HR completely backwards. And I was the one that my friends were always like, I'm sorry, you do what? You're an HR director?
Yeah.
So I spent a lot of good years in corporate America. Some of those years were great. Some of those years weren't great. As I got into that and kind of understood the shackles and the red tape and the politics and the backstabbing and the corporate laddering and all of the other aspects that go with that. So I had a nice little intermediate point in 2008 and 2009 for those that are old enough to remember that there was this huge real estate collapse and then consequently a financial collapse. And I was the junior of 2 directors of human resources at the time for a large hotel chain. Ergo, I was let go. And at that time, that was kind of a bad thing to lose your job. And then you started to realize during that time that everyone at some point was like, I got laid off. And it became not such a toxic word anymore to say that. You started seeing it more and more resumes. But during that time, it was the worst financial time since the 1929 Depression. And so I had the brilliant idea of let's open a restaurant. There's nothing financially insoluble about that, right?
Yeah.
But my work logic there and kind of the atypical way of thinking has always been banks aren't going to lend to anyone else, and they're certainly not going to lend to restaurants. So nobody else is going to be opening restaurants right now. So I believe there is a space for that. So with help of my dad, I was able to finance that privately, build it from concept to completion in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. We opened a wonderful little gym there. I tell you, it was the best HR compliant restaurant that's ever been. Files were good, wages were on point, harassment complaints were few. So we were able to do that. We're open up a really cool restaurant. But during that time, got married, had my first child, and thought, gosh, this is hard. I'm sometimes able to pay myself, sometimes I'm not. So sold my majority share of that in 2013 and went back into corporate America. That lasted about 2.5 years.
Yeah.
Once you have that taste of working for yourself, owning your own business, not having to answer those questions, it's really hard to get back into that. So broke away from that in 2016 in August, founded Human Operations Solutions. And from that point forward, consultative was the way to go.
Nice.
Yeah, absolutely. That. What was the best food item at the restaurant? Like, what was the thing that people came there for, other than your personality and charm?
Yeah. So it was a neat shop because it was really a take on classic favorites, and more specifically Southern classic favorites. So one of the ones that people loved is I had my mother's pimento cheese recipe, and so we would do a toasted pimento cheese with thick cut bacon and avocado. We had one that was a take on a peanut butter banana sandwich, but we toasted it, put Nutella on the other side with some cinnamon sugar. We did things like that. I just had a ton of fun with it. So just really multiple things like that, but everything is as close to farm to table as we could get it. Craft brewing was really kind of in its infancy at that point, so we made every effort to get North Carolina beers and wines, get as much local on tap as we possibly could, and really kind of market it that way.
That's awesome. Oh, that sounds so good. I want more food now.
My kids, we do sandwich nights sometimes, and my kids get some of that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's pretty good, man. I my mouth is watering just a little bit about the toasted banana peanut butter Nutella sandwich. That sounds pretty legit.
It's fun. Yeah.
I'm curious to hear you talk about HR because I know your approach to HR is a little different, like how you kind of like to approach it. So maybe speak to that a little bit, and we can dive into that.
Sure. I think that kind of goes into my atypical or accidental HR tourist role, because I think historically it is changing, and I think HR as a function and as a division, it has evolved because it's had to. But I think for a long time, for the first 20 years that I did this, HR was really viewed as the slap you on the wrist, tell you what you can't do, police, kind of the speed bump. It's Toby from The Office, right? Everyone walking in and saying, "Oh, HR's here," or "Don't say that, HR's here." Dave and I have had enough fun with mixed company, saying things they shouldn't say, and us, being in the room, to where hopefully I've overcome that. But my view of HR is truly as a business and operations partner. And I've always been curious about the operation, which made it tough with HR, because if I was sitting at an executive table and I'm listening to the sales or the operations team or the finance team, and I'm the one that raises my hand and says, "Well, could we possibly consider doing it like this?" It's like, shut up, HR, stay in your lane. Shut up, HR, that's not your role. And I've always been very curious about the business, and I love knowing how it ticks. I love knowing how people make money. I love knowing that the right people are in the right seats. And I think that often, probably like me, people fell backwards into the wrong seat in the organization. Yeah. And so I think that that's how I would classify myself a little bit differently in HR, is especially for those fast-moving entrepreneurial young businesses or those that are on a rapid growth pace. I tend to be the person that says, "Okay, I hear what you want to do. Here's how," or "Here's the yes," or "Here's the way you can do that." And funny enough, I've had a couple of business leaders that are like, "Man, I just want you to keep me out of jail." Okay, we can do that. And I kind of love hearing that, because at least they're giving me a seat at the table. But so often HR was relegated to, "We'll call you when we need you," or "We've had an EEO suit against us. We must need HR." And that's not the area from which I like to operate. I would much rather be a thought leader and a partner, and someone who's kind of non-judgmental of the people in leadership positions, who understands the visionary, who understands the integrator, who understands the people who get it done in the business, and then helps move those people along and keep it moving. So that's kind of my vision of what HR and the function is.
Yeah. So, I mean, I love some of the things that you're pointing out, right? Because you've got like the compliance, benefits, payroll version of HR, right? Which is like the functioning of the business. Those things are necessary, right, in order for the business to function. But, now there's chief people officers, and there's, chief fun officers, or whatever these, kind of people culture oriented, or chief culture officer, whatever you want to call it. What is the role that you are kind of leaning into as you talk about HR kind of evolving, where it becomes a little bit more tied to the strategic kind of people version of the company, right? Like, I think people are being a lot more strategic about how they engage their employees, what they think about. Like, they have to be, as folks are leaving corporate America, they're leaving these different spaces, and they're looking for, well, how can I be me in this place, right? Like, where do I get to be? Does this organization see me? Right. So I think some of the context shifting is folks want to work from home more. They want to be more, engaged. They want to be seen. They want more meaning in what they're doing. Like, how are you kind of weaving some of that in?
It's a great question. And I think, the quick business plug here is, we do everything soup to nuts. Your compliance piece, your handbooks, Dave, I know you love that one. Your handbooks, your job descriptions, all the compliance, we do that. But what I started to find for myself is, while I recognize the need and the importance of that, it's not a personal passion. So as far as weaving into that, that's where, just like you said, I enjoy a little bit more helping each of the stakeholders kind of understand what that value is and what that represents, and what the turnover is, what the cost of replacement is, what is going to keep people generationally and across generations. It's changing. It's changing at rapid pace. Is what's going to keep, what is going to keep people engaged in your business and there. I had a stakeholder recently who just said, I guess we can expect to turn this position over every 18 months. And I said, gosh, yeah, I guess you could expect that if you would like to expect that. But what if we could keep them for 36? What if we could keep them for 16 months? Like, what can we do? Pardon me, to keep them a bit longer and help them understand that. So I think it's more the employee life cycle, start to finish, and helping people understand innovative ways to impact each of those. From the time that you decide you want to bring somebody into the organization, what organizations haven't done historically is look in the mirror and say, are we attractive? Are we good looking? Do people want to work for us? So I think it starts there, Dave, with weaving it at that point and saying, are we even attractive? Would people even want to work here? All the way through to the development, the succession planning, the eventual, exit of a president or a CEO or a visionary who doesn't want to do this forever. So how do we push everyone in the organization up through and kind of grow that? And then how does it all become cohesive? And then how do we not silo ourselves and create these different teams that are not one team? So I just spoke a lot about that, but truly that's kind of how the weaving is involved there, of making sure that people understand that HR can impact all of that, with communication, with conversation, and with kind of getting in there and asking some more questions.
Yeah. I mean, I love that. What do you see as, you mentioned like trying to make it a kind of a welcoming environment, or that's kind of different for the different generations. Like, what are you seeing that's working? What are you seeing that's not working? Like, you've been in, hundreds of organizations at this point in time. I'm sure you've seen some things that you're like, oh no, never do this, right? Like never make that decision, but definitely make this one. And I'm just curious if you can give some examples.
What I'm seeing that's very interesting is companies have gone soft on feedback. And interestingly, Gen Z and Gen Alpha that are coming in, I've had people in interviews that are asking, please tell me about your feedback. Tell me about your review process in interviews.
Interesting.
And historically, that never happened. And it wasn't because they want to know when they're going to get their 2.5% increase and go. They quite literally want to know how they're doing, how they can do better, how they impact, what their relevance is, all of those things within the organization. So when I get into an organization, if there's not a clearly defined onboarding, I think that's kind of a flag there. It's not a fast food joint anymore where they throw you a t-shirt and say, cool, shadow this person and go around to flip some burgers. They really want to understand what their first, not even 30, not even 60, but like 120, 180 days looks like.
Yeah.
And so mapping that out for people in a clear onboarding, but then what is their feedback along the way? And maybe it's the generational fear of being blindsided with just being fired and not knowing, understanding why. That may be a lot of that, but then it extends not only for Gen Z, Gen Alpha people that are coming in, but even the people that are millennials that are striving. They're a little bit more competitive. And so, I use my wife as an example, and I'm sure she's going to watch this. But with her organization, they have, meets, exceeds, all these different levels there. And so that's how they kind of identify year over year is I was a meets exceeds last year. I was an exceeds. So the label there and the competition to achieve said label is also really super interesting. You asked me if I think that works. No, not really. I don't think it does. I think that's a once a year thing that people don't necessarily get enough feedback. I think it needs to be far more frequent than that. So maybe that's the final wrap up bow to this is frequency of communication and feedback.
Yeah, well, maybe a little bit more like a status badge, right? Like something that you can actually hold over other people. It's not actually feedback. It's just look, mom. I won the prize, and now I can tell all my friends about it.
Well, it's no wonder. Sorry, go ahead.
No, please, Annie.
I would say it's no wonder. I mean, everything you're saying about millennials, even like Gen Z to an extent, so I'm a millennial, it makes sense because look at how we were raised on every standardized test you could possibly imagine. And we were labeled. And then once we wanted to access or unlock a new level in life or access college or whatever, you had to have certain labels in order to access it. And then you had 4 years laid out for you. And also considering the fact that, so we grow up with all these labels and we are told that having them is really good and will contribute to more good things. We also entered a workforce and a world that was full of chaos. I mean, I'm sure you've heard all of the, conversations, or I know Dave's not on social media, but if you're on social media, lots of videos about like millennials have been through like wars and a pandemic and like all of these things that shake the ground underneath you. And so a lot of us have more anxiety than past generations. So to the point about saying like, well, people want to know what their first 180 days looks like. Yeah, because the rest of the world is really unpredictable. So it'd be really nice if my job could paint a picture of my next 6 months that I know I can achieve. I can get those labels. Give me the X, Y, and Z. I'll achieve those labels. And then I can rely on this one thing in my life because everything else seems to be a little more chaotic than what they told me it would be when I was a kid.
True. Yeah. Two points to that. One of the things that you said, this is actually labeled the age of terrorism, and it's so super sad, but it's true. I mean, starting with 9/11, moving forward, mass shootings, bombings, wars, it's awful. And so you're right. And I think through the financial crisis that I mentioned earlier, kids have seen their parents let go for little to no reason.
Yeah.
Right. So you're right. There's an instability and an insecurity there. And I think that's actually, a real part of that. And the second part was you mentioned grades. And it's funny because we personally chose to start our children both in a Montessori education. And so up through really this year, from when we moved schools, they never had grades. So it was really funny this year when they got their report cards and we were like, congratulations, you got straight A's. They were like, so what does that mean?
That means, yeah.
But I think what's intrinsically valuable with that is
so valuable
is that there's just a love of learning and a love of education that grades were kind of a natural byproduct. And I think that if we tie that back to corporations where there is a joy in the work, there is a joy in the culture, there is feedback and positive reinforcement, people can take pride in what they do, and the results will typically, not always. There are some people that just will never get the job because they're in the wrong seat.
Sure.
But for the most part, if people can lead in that direction, and people like, Dave and you, Hannah, and others can sit positively at a C level and start to influence that and talk about culture, then I think there's a really high probability that people will stay in jobs, people will attain more, they will achieve more, and then natural growth, revenue growth, all that will be a byproduct.
Yeah, I mean, we really, I mean, just to kind of echo what you're saying, like we really push for, at a minimum, monthly conversations with employees about performance. And I think to your point, like it really does perpetuate kind of a growth mindset when we're actually talking about performance regularly. And it also demystifies it a little bit, right? When you have an annual review, if somebody's like, hey, Robert, it's your annual review, what does your brain do? It goes 365 days in reverse, thinking about all the things you did wrong, typically, right? Like we create these narratives and we start making meaning of like, oh crap, am I going to get my badge? Did I do the thing? Are they going to remember that I missed that report that one time? Like all this baggage we start carrying around for that annual review. And sometimes the annual reviews are totally pointless because you're not actually getting feedback. It's a perfunctory exercise. Like it's not actually developmental. And I love kind of what you're pointing at here in terms of like, there is actually some developmental truth. And actually, I heard this earlier today and I thought it was profound. It was basically like management is dead. Coaching is the new management. And I was like, it's an interesting thought. Like management and the, technical, like accountability version of it, but coaching is a little bit more kind of growth, performance oriented. So I liked what you said at the outset in terms of like HR is kind of evolving. Like how does HR in small business and entrepreneurial startup settings, like how can HR support that kind of growth mindset, that development, that let's continue to advance and grow without without too much emphasis on the compliance side of things and the, you only talk to them if you did poorly kind of thing.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a question?
I think so. maybe it didn't end up being clear, but really what I was
enamored with what you were saying. I was just like, yes. I didn't know it was a question.
So maybe I can reiterate it. I don't know. Maybe I can make it a little bit clearer, but I guess the question is like, how can like HR and small business support that development, support that growth differently than it has in the past? Like even in performance reviews, like what does a good performance review look like? Like, what are we talking about? Is it, did you get your badge of honor? Did you get your, trophy? Or is it like, hey, when you're in these conversations, I'm seeing this pattern. Maybe there's a way we could think about it differently. Like what sets the context for some of those conversations?
You're going to love it, Dave. It's core values.
What?
And I know, right? But no, truly, that's, as you and I both sat with leadership teams and executives and owners, everything about those core values should flow downhill, and everything that someone does in their work should then point back up to relevance of the core values of the business. You call it often swimming in the same direction. And so I listen. So really you want to make sure you're all swimming in the same direction. So how do you make that relevant to business owners? You point back to the core values, and each individual person all the way down with their job, with their relevance, with their context, even in how they're doing, if you make it more about alignment with core values and less about, you missed a deadline, you mistyped this, you're wrong, you're bad, and then spin that to how can we get you closer to alignment? How can we get you closer to fulfillment and getting, to the team value and the business value and the relevance? I think that's a really positive way. And I think we've had success in doing that. With doing that, performance reviews are a thing, like a handbook. You get in and as we do our cursory under the hood glance, we ask about that. What is your template? What is your feedback? How do you do it? And if it's attendance, initiative, teamwork, these are all very generic and very bland, KPIs that you use. And if you can then switch that to, well, can we possibly align this feedback session, this coaching session to the core values? I really don't get a lot of pushback from ownership groups. They don't necessarily want to do the legwork, but if you position it to them of, this is your business direction and mission that you've chosen, and now we can align all performance conversations to that, usually it's pretty easy to get there. That can also be generational. So,
yeah, you mentioned early on about ego. So, that we're in some ways talking about performance reviews up, down, right? But there's also performance and advisory that happens at the C-suite level, right? Like, and where does the feedback show up for that group? The three of us spend most of our time advising C-suite members and leadership teams or managers, VPs, those types of folks, right? Like, we are working with the people who give the feedback more often than not. So what gets in the way at times, like when you think about ego, what are some of the pros and cons of ego as you work with leadership teams? Like, where does that either get in the way or support the work that we're doing?
It's a terrific question. And I tell you, it's funny because I do believe that there is a healthy degree of ego that's necessary in your visionary, in your hunter, in your business gatherer. You do need it. But if it reaches almost a critical level of ego with leadership of, I'm not going to listen to you, I can do better than you, I already know the way, it's better than what you tell me, that's where it becomes harmful. And I think that's evaluating that early in a consultative relationship is really important. And for me now at this point in my journey as a consultant, pardon me, it's really what I come to the table in initial meetings with that, and I start to evaluate with the onboarding of a client what that ego level is going to be and how hard an individual is going to be to deal with based on that. Because if the ego is so high, and you know what, a lot of these business owners, and they've had a high level of success, and so you have to recognize that, and we have to play to that and really say to them, you have been super successful, or you've had a moderate level of success, but I see that you want a tremendous level of success. You want to continue this success. I have noticed that this might be in the way of that success. Mm-hmm. Because also with high ego commonly comes low trust, and you know that too. Yeah. And so I think as you get into an HR relationship, it's very similar to a finance relationship with your CPA. We need to be given all of the tools. Sometimes you and I joke about opening the kimono, and we have to see it all, right? And I've got to know what's good and bad. And with leadership and ego, it takes the right time to show them that mirror and to help them with that mirror and say, hey, you're really super awesome and you're really great, but this mirror in the way, that's the ego, the trust, the not letting me in to advise you. That can be an issue, and that's going to be a problem because also other people are noticing that ego.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please. Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say, I think so much of it from my experience as not a C-suite person, more so, someone who manages up, the difference in good leadership is whether they listen. And I feel like a lot of people who have like high ego fear that if they listen, they have to do something about what they hear. And oftentimes, like, it's just that we want to know that we're heard and that we get some kind of affirmation, rather than like, well, if I give the feedback that like X, Y, and Z needs to change, if I know that it was heard and it was somehow taken into account, then I feel respected, I feel appreciated. But if the avenues aren't even there for feedback or for open communication, and if I know that my boss is just nodding and thinking about, whatever game they're going to after work this evening, then why am I even here? So I think it comes back to, you mentioned earlier, it's just the value of listening. And when you have an ego, yes, you have to have it in business. Yes, you have to be the hunter gatherer and you have to lead the team and you do have to have a certain level of it. But when you have ego mixed with a lack of listening, that's, I think, like the recipe for trouble.
I agree. And I think the other part that you said that's very poignant there is I love that you transition there, because that's probably the single greatest lesson I've learned during my 8 years as a consultant. Because when I went in to this, I very candidly was not a humble advisor. And it was, this is the way you need to do it. This is my expertise.
Sure.
This is what I do. And it's become a little bit more of understanding that my role here is to advise you and guide you the best that I can. It is up to you to accept that information and use it. And usually, unless it's illegal or immoral, that's where I really dig my heels in. I'm like, no, what you're doing will land you in jail, or this is unethical.
Right.
Otherwise, these are things that we can certainly bend on, and we can say, and it's happened with multiple clients where I've made a recommendation, they went another direction, and then the situation arose again, and I've had people that ask me like, oh, so are you like humble, smug, like I told you? No, never. Yeah. And the reason for that is most of the time my intelligent clients will remember, you told me this last time, we didn't do it, we're going to go a different direction. And then it becomes a case study a little bit more than I told you so.
Yeah.
And I love them. I love when it can develop into a case study of, hey, we tried this before and there were some really great sticking points here, but ultimately it wasn't successful. What can we do to manipulate that a little bit? So you play to the ego, you recognize that it's needed, but humble leaders, gosh, I'll take them every time.
Yeah, for sure. One thing you mentioned is, at the outset, like I think when I first got into the consulting world, I always felt like I had to have the answers of like, puff your chest up a little bit. Like they're going to pepper me and I need to know what the answer is. And I think we've really evolved over time to know, like, actually what we need to know is what are the questions. And our job is not about finding the answers. It's about finding the right questions. Because if we find the right questions, we can work together then, and we can partner with you to figure out what the right answer is. And then we can steward and support and push and not, nudge to get whatever needs to get done. But really it's like, it's the people that we work with are running businesses for a reason, right? They're smart, they're good, hardworking folks. And often it's like there's just a behavior or something they can't see because they're deep in the weeds, because they're deep in things, or because they're experts in 97 other things and not the 3 things that we're experts in. Totally. Right? And our job is to say like, hey, have you ever thought about it like this? Right? What do you think? How does it work? Tell me about what this pain is. Like, just to get them to see it differently and then to make those choices. I think that's really a powerful way to work with, these folks that we I admire a lot of the folks that we work with.
Right? Yeah, like
absolutely. Smart, intelligent folks.
For sure. Well, and kind of on that point, and sort of to wrap us up here, because I want to be respectful of your time. What is it that you think, if you could kind of pinpoint 1 or 2 things that you would encourage business leaders to think about more, to consider more, to ponder more when it comes to human relations, their people, what would you encourage people to sit and think on and ponder, give more time to?
That's a great question. And number one, I asked a question recently to an organizational leader, and I asked him, I said, would you consider yourself a well-educated organization? And he paused and he said, no. And I thought that was a really, really wonderful moment to lean into, because there were things, through internships, job shadowing, professional developments, lunch and learns, all of these things that, gosh, between LinkedIn and YouTube and Sherm and all these, some of them are borderline free at this point. But this individual had not taken the opportunity to look at his organization top to bottom. And it wasn't that his people weren't well educated, because he had master's degrees and high levels of postgraduate work. But as far as their particular organization, he was not confident to say, we are a well-educated organization. So I think I would encourage every CEO and organizational leader, and then from top to bottom, whether this is somebody that's making bolts, in a die cast factory, do they know other jobs? Are there jobs that would be, does one person have all of this knowledge, or are we spreading that knowledge around? Are they going to hold you hostage later? That's even from the line level all the way to this junior manager who's 24, who's going to leave because they're awesome if we don't give them challenge and development and growth and education. To the person who's 54, who's not really great at Excel spreadsheets, but probably needs to be. And can we give them a course? Are we looking at it laterally and also vertically in the educational realm, and really kind of looking at that and understanding it? So that's the first one that I think is a blind spot of organizations, is asking the question, are we a well-educated organization? And the next one is really, really common, and it's, are we leading with kindness? And does that exude through the organization?
Yeah.
And sadly, I would say, in my experience, 50% of my organizations are not. And I understand that. They need to make money. They need to make hard decisions. And that's where I think I'm a little bit different with HR, because I get it. You're not making money. You're not profitable. You don't have the margins. Okay. Somebody's got to go. But I mean a little bit more, are we leading with common kindness and courtesies? Do we have a courteous workplace? Do we have somebody do we know something about our team members? Do we know something as rudimentary as a birthday list? Are we doing any sort of celebrations? Are we leading with kindness? And I think companies that can start to capitalize on kindness, TM, let's figure that out. Capitalize on kindness can start to gain an edge, because I think we've slipped into a place during COVID and post-COVID where it's not really a factor anymore. So I think those are two things from a feeling and a tangibility perspective. One, education of the workforce, and are we a well-educated organization? And two, are we leading with kindness?
I love it.
Yeah. That first one you mentioned, there's I don't remember if I saw this as like a funny statement somewhere where I saw this quote, but I think it's poignant to what you just said. It's, what if we spend all this money, educate our people, and they leave? And then the other person is like, well, what if we don't and they stay?
Right.
You're like, yeah, it's the paradigm of like, well, we want to be developing our people. And if they leave, but we want to develop an educated staff, because if we can do that, like obviously our organization wins in the long run. You're more likely to stay because you're putting resources in, you're educating, you're teaching, like you're creating that platform. And I don't think those two things are mutually exclusive. I think kindness, educating your people, feedback, as you were talking about, kindness, all go hand in hand, right? Like we're actually taking care of our people. So you're a good example of that. You're a good champion of that in organizations. It's why you're our go-to HR guy, because we line up from a values perspective. So I've always appreciated that.
Yeah, Thank you so much for being with us today, Robert. We really, really appreciate it. We will make sure that your website is linked in the show notes, and your LinkedIn as well, in case people want to stay in touch or reach out. Anything else we didn't get to, guys? I think we'll say our goodbyes.
Maybe just anything you're working on right now that's got you fired up and you want to share with the audience.
No, I appreciate that. The only thing we're working on right now is kind of redeveloping our platform for clients, and what that means is shortening the ramp up. In other words, we have needs assessments that we give to our clients to determine whether they even need an HR partner. Then once they get in, we give them an onboarding assessment, and we're doing a lot of things to automate right now and really get in with our clients. We've expanded our team from 2 to 4 over the last 12 months to really give a bandwidth of an increased bandwidth, I think is a better way to say that, of strategic support, executive coaching support, tactical HR management support, and then administrative support. So those are the 4 areas we really cover now for our clients, really able to personalize that and make it work in a boutique style. So still atypical HR, it's what we will always be, but that's what we're doing.
I love that. Congratulations. I didn't know you had more people on the team now. That's awesome.
Thank you.
That's awesome. Well, thank you again, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks.
He's the best.
He's a good dude. He's a good guy. Like I said, he's our go-to HR guy. I think in part, some of the last things that he said, I really see him embody. Yeah, really talking about the kindness piece. Really, we didn't really get to the topic, but he is a very good advocate and example of communication across an organization. Like, he's very good at making sure that people are informed, they know what's going on. And I would argue that, when he talked about kindness, I would argue that's a huge part of it is, do people know what's going on? Like, are we informing folks of what's happening? And are we being open and honest and transparent about what's happening in the business and making sure that folks are informed? I've seen him support multiple companies in that way. And you can see the comfortability and the feeling seen elevate across an organization. I think he's good at what he does. He's good at what he does, and he lives what he says. So good guy to have on. Absolutely.
For sure. Yeah, no, that was great. I think what's sitting with me is, and because it is, my experience to an extent, companies have their work cut out for them when it comes to managing all these different generations and figuring out how to unite them, how to please them in a sense, how to keep them around. Millennials, Gen Z, we are a different breed than came before us because of all the things that those previous generations set up for us. And I think being aware of it, being intentional about how you manage those different generations and cater to them in a sense, but also how to bring them together is a challenge. And so it's just great to hear him talk about that, because I think more people should be aware of it, and we should study it more. I mean, I see some articles every once in a while about that kind of stuff, but it's just so crucial. I mean, everybody's looking for value in their day-to-day life in a way I think that they haven't before.
Yeah. Well, and even just at the outset, like, not just giving feedback, but the type of feedback that we're giving and how we're thinking about it, and the consistency, and more developmental than punitive, right? Bringing the core values in, all just good practices to have. So thanks again to Robert for hopping in on the podcast, and I'll let you wrap it up.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us on the Business Velocity podcast. Today's insights are just the beginning of enhancing your business's momentum. Don't forget to subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to us right now. And we are looking to help you turn your potential into performance. You can also check out the 5 facets of business at theevolvedifference.com. And remember, the time is now to take these strategies, apply your learning, and achieve velocity. We'll see you next time.